I've embalmed hundreds of bodies and stared into more lifeless faces than I can count, but only one night ever made me doubt the line between the living and the dead. That night still follows me in dreams, in shadows, in the mirror. This is the story I swore I'd never tell. People think morticians are numb to death, that we work with corpses the way mechanics work with engines, unsentimental, detached, immune to horror. For years I believed that too. Night shifts in the embalming room were just another kind of silence, just another kind of routine. But death has a weight you can feel when you're alone in a mortuary at 3 a.m. The air presses indifferently, smells sharper, the walls echo, and sometimes the dead don't feel quite as still as they should. It was on one of those nights, during a thunderstorm that knocked out the power and left the whole building gasping in the dark, that we received the body of Elena Price, a young woman found under circumstances no one would explain. Her death certificate said, cardiac arrest. Her body said otherwise. That was the night I stopped believing in routine. That was the night something inside the mortuary woke up, and the dead looked back at me. The rain began at dusk, hammering the slate roof of the old mortuary like a steady drumbeat. By the time I arrived for the overnight shift, the gutters were spilling over and water snaked in silver rivulets down the cracked concrete steps. The sign above the front door, Caraway and Sons Funeral Home, flickered in the dark, its neon letters buzzing faintly. I paused under the awning, wiped the rain from my glasses, and tried to ignore the churn of unease in my stomach. I had worked at the funeral home for nearly 3 years, but this was my first full night alone. Mr. Caraway, the owner and my mentor, had driven out earlier to tend to his sick wife. He had promised to check in by phone. The other attendants had gone home hours ago. It was just me, the bodies, and the cavernous building that had stood on the edge of town since 1892. Inside, the air was warm but smelled of disinfectant, wax polish, and faintly of flowers. The lobby was dim except for a single desk lamp. Rows of chairs lined the walls. Framed photographs of somber funeral services from decades past stared at me like sepia ghosts. Beyond the lobby stretched a maze of corridors, the viewing rooms, the offices, the prep room, and the embalming suite in the basement, the heart of the operation, where the dead waited to be made presentable. I hung up my coat and walked down the main hallway, my shoes squeaking on the linoleum. My footsteps echoed in the empty building, each step sounding like a distant reply. I thought of something Caraway always said. Night changes everything here. Buildings remember what happened inside them. I'd always taken it as a poetic quirk of an old man who'd worked around death too long. But tonight the words clung to me. The night's main task waited in the refrigerated storage room, the body of Elena Price, 29 years old, found dead under what the police had called unusual circumstances. The paperwork gave me the basics: name, age, time of death, a hastily written note about abrasions and symbols on torso, no family contact listed yet, no clergy requested. Just me and her until morning. I tried to steady my nerves as I unlocked the steel door to the storage area. A hiss of cold air puffed out. The room smelled faintly of formaldehyde and something sweet, like dried roses. Rows of covered forms lay on metal racks. Only one was untagged, drawer 4B. I pulled it open. Elena Price lay swaddled in a white sheet. Even under the fabric, I could see the outline of her limbs too thin. Hands folded unnaturally stiff at her waist. Her dark hair spilled out from beneath the sheet like a black tide. I pulled the sheet back slowly, exposing her face. She looked like she might sit up at any moment. Her skin was pale but not gray yet, lips slightly parted, eyes closed but not relaxed, the lids clenched. A dark bruise ringed her neck, and across her collarbones, just below the throat, were faint etchings. Symmetrical lines and circles, like symbols carved with a needle. I took a step back and swallowed hard. The case file hadn't mentioned how extensive they were. I slid the drawer back in and shut the door. "It's just work," I muttered. Nothing new. But my hands trembled as I prepped the embalming room downstairs. The embalming suite was a cavern of stainless steel and tile. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Instruments gleamed under the bright glare. Scalpels, forceps, cannulas, bottles of arterial fluid lined up like colored soldiers. A drain ran along the center of the floor. The room smelled sharp and clean, like antiseptic. It was almost reassuring. I rolled Elena's gurney into place. The wheels squeaked. Thunder rattled the windows. I set about my routine, gloves on, tools arranged, paperwork clipped to the counter. Everything by the book. The ritual of preparation calmed me. Caraway had always said that embalming was like guiding someone through a doorway. And if I thought of it that way, it felt less mechanical, more sacred. Still, a strange tension pressed in from the corners of the room, as if the air itself were charged. I glanced up at the security camera in the corner, an old black dome with a blinking red light. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of movement in the reflection of the steel counter behind me. But when I turned, there was nothing. It was nearly 11 p.m. by the time I finished my initial prep. Outside, rain still pounded the roof. The mortuary creaked and shifted, pipes knocking like muffled footsteps. I brewed a weak cup of coffee in the staff kitchen and stood by the window, looking out into the dark lot. Only my car and Caraway's old hearse sat under the flickering lamp post. Beyond the fence was nothing but trees and black fields. When I came back to the embalming room, the door was ajar. I was sure I'd closed it. The gurney sat exactly where I'd left it. Elena's body was still covered with a sheet, but the toe tag now hung crookedly, as if someone had twisted it. My heart was hammered. I reached for it, and realized my gloves were missing from the counter. I found them on the floor, as though knocked off. It was subtle enough that I could explain it away. Fatigue. Stress. The building's drafty old doors. I forced a laugh, shaking my head, and retrieved the gloves. "First full night alone, and you're already scaring yourself," I said aloud. Yet as I spoke, a whisper brushed my ear. Not a draft. A voice. Just one word, impossible to catch. I spun around. Nothing but the white walls and the soft hiss of the ventilation. I finished setting up and moved toward Elena's body again, pulling the sheet back. The symbols across her chest seemed darker now, as if inked instead of carved. Her lips had parted wider, teeth faintly visible. A trick of the light, I told myself, but I had to swallow twice before my voice came out steady enough to say, "Let's begin." I adjusted the overhead lamp, the bright circle of light falling over her torso. Thunder cracked. For an instant the lights dimmed, then flared back. The security camera's red light blinked off, then on again. I had the oddest sensation that someone else had just entered the room. I even said, "Caraway," though I knew he was miles away. Silence answered me. I started the initial incision at the carotid, my hand steady despite the crawling sensation on my neck. As the scalpel touched her skin, I swore I felt a vibration like the hum of a live wire. I drew back. The line of the cut was shallow but already beading with dark fluid. Not blood, exactly. Thicker, almost black, with a faint metallic smell. The building's power flickered once more. The light steadied. When I looked back at Elena's face, her eyes were half open. Just half. Enough for me to see a glint of the whites. Enough to make my stomach turn to ice. I stumbled back against the counter. The scalpel clattered to the floor. "No," I said under my breath. "No." Post-mortem reflex. Nothing more. Her eyes closed again as if they had never moved. The fluid at her neck stilled. I pressed my back to the wall and listened. Rain. Thunder. The steady tick of the clock above the door. And beneath it all, a new sound. Faint, rhythmic, like breathing. I stared at her chest. It did not rise or fall. Yet the sound persisted. Soft, wet inhalations from nowhere. That's when the mortuary phone rang. A sharp, metallic bell that jolted me upright. I snatched it up. "Caraway," I whispered. A pause, then a low voice, hoarse and distorted, said, "She's not ready." Click, the line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, heart racing. The embalming room's hum returned, but everything else felt off kilter, the angles wrong, the shadows too deep. I set the phone down slowly. My watch read 2:28 a.m. Somewhere deep inside the building, a door creaked open on its own. And that was how my most terrifying night as a mortician truly began. The building had gone so still that every sound carried like a blade through water. I could hear the faint hum of the embalming machine, the clicking pipes, and that slow, wet breathing that seemed to come from nowhere. My hand trembled as I reached for the door handle to the autopsy room, half convinced that, if I opened it, someone would be standing on the other side. No one was. Only the long corridor with its tiled floor reflecting the emergency lights. The storm outside had driven the power into brownouts. The fluorescents buzzed and flickered overhead, making the hall stretch and shrink like a funhouse. I forced myself back to the body. In all the training manuals, the solution to night shift anxiety was routine. Routine would ground me. I'd log the intake notes, examine the injuries, and prep the body for embalming. Caraway would have done the same. I peeled the sheet away from Elena's body completely now. The markings stood out sharper under the harsh lamp. Lines carved in perfect symmetry, circles intersected with runes. Someone had done this deliberately, carefully. Some of the cuts were healed over as if old, others were raw. Her hands were thin and bruised at the wrists, nails caked with dirt. As I leaned closer, a smell of damp soil and copper filled my nose. It wasn't coming from her clothes. We'd stripped those off earlier. It was rising from her skin itself, as though she had been buried alive. I took photographs for the file. Each flash made the room seem emptier afterward. When I lifted her left arm to check for needle marks, her hand fell against mine. It was limp but heavy, cold. My own skin crawled. I tried to measure her pupils with a penlight. A ridiculous habit, since she was dead. But the lids didn't want to lift. When they did, her eyes had a faint clouded film over the irises. The pupils were tiny pinpoints. I dropped the lids quickly. Ashamed at how fast my heart was hammering, I moved to the instrument tray. Cannula, scalpel, trocar. The stainless steel gleamed with a bluish tint. For a moment, the reflection showed something standing directly behind me. A long shape, a smear of darkness like a human silhouette. I whipped around, but the room was empty except for the gurney, the drain, and the clock on the wall ticking toward 2:33 a.m. Caraway's words from earlier that weak clawed their way into my mind. Between 2:33 and 3:03, the house breathes. Don't be alone then. The lights flickered again. In the flash of darkness, the gurney creaked as if under new weight. I swallowed and reached for the arterial fluid. The machine's hoses hissed softly as pressure built. I inserted the cannula at the carotid, hands steady only because of muscle memory. Dark fluid oozed sluggishly, not the usual post-mortem drainage, but something thicker, like ink. The smell intensified, wet earth, rot, and faintly sweet like decaying flowers. Then came the whisper, right at my ear. Not words, just a hiss like breath dragged through teeth. I spun, heart hammering, but again saw nothing. My gloves were slick now, not just from fluid but from sweat. I glanced at the wall clock, 2:36 a.m., the window hour. Something tickled at the edge of my vision. Her right hand had moved. Not a spasm. It had rotated palm up, fingers curling slightly like someone flexing in their sleep. I whispered to myself, post-mortem reflex. But my voice cracked on the last word. The embalming machine gave a sharp wheeze and shut itself off. Lights dimmed to a dull red glow. Every steel surface reflected Elena's face now, as though the entire room had become a hall of mirrors filled with her likeness. In each reflection, her eyes were open, staring straight at me. I stumbled back against the sink. Stop it. I hissed at the empty room. You're dead. This is my work. Stop it. A faint scratching came from the far wall. My eyes darted to the tiled surface. Words began appearing, one slow scrape at a time, as if carved by invisible fingernails. Illitimoti. I froze. The letters were small but perfectly straight. They dug into the tile grout, flakes of white drifting down like snow. I blinked hard. The words vanished. The tiles were smooth again. I grabbed the embalming tool to resume, needing the routine like oxygen. As the trocar touched her abdomen, a low moan rose from her throat. A real sound, resonant and wet. I dropped the tool. It clanged on the tile, the echo bouncing around the room. Her lips moved slightly, not in a grimace but shaping words. No air came out, yet I thought I heard her in my skull. Not yet. Not yet. The security camera above me clicked softly and turned on its axis with a tiny whir. It hadn't moved in years. Its red light blinked off, on, off. I bolted to the door but found it locked from the outside. No key, no give. The knob refused to turn as though fused in place. From behind me came the rustle of the sheets sliding to the floor. I turned slowly, my back pressed to the door. Elena Price was sitting up on the gurney. Her head lolled to one side, her hair spilling forward. Her eyes were rolled back, but slowly, deliberately, they tracked down to meet mine. Dark fluid dripped from the cut at her neck, running in rivulets across the symbols carved in her skin. Her mouth opened wider and wider, past the hinge of anything human, until it was a black, perfect circle. Then the lights went out completely. For a long moment there was only the sound of breathing. Not mine, not hers, but the building itself. Slow, vast inhalations from every vent and crack in the walls. Something cold touched the back of my neck. And just like that, the lights blinked back on. Elena lay on the gurney as before, sheet drawn up to her collarbone, eyes closed, mouth slack. The embalming machine hummed as though it had never stopped. The clock on the wall read 7:58 a.m. I was crouched against the door, my hands clamped over my ears. The mortuary was silent again. When the lights finally steadied and the embalming machine purred again, I stayed crouched against the autopsy room door for a long time, shaking. I could hear my own pulse like surf in my ears. The clock ticked past 300 a.m., the end of that cursed window hour Caraway had muttered about so many times. I got to my feet slowly. Elena's body lay exactly as it had before the blackout, sheet drawn up, eyes shut, a placid mask. No signs she'd moved. No marks on the floor. No fresh scratches on the tile. The words "Illitimoti" were gone again. If it hadn't been for the black fluid still staining my gloves, I might have convinced myself I'd imagined everything. My phone buzzed. I yanked it out with trembling hands. Caraway's number. I swiped to answer. "Sir." His voice came through thick with static, as though from another century. "Stay out of the prep room until dawn." "Do you hear me?" I pressed the phone to my ear. "What's happening here? What's wrong with this woman's body?" "You shouldn't be alone there," he said. "Lock the viewing rooms, and whatever you do, don't." The line went dead, a flat tone slicing through the air. I stared at the screen. Call ended. I tried dialing back, straight to voicemail. Rain pounded the roof in a constant roar. The fluorescents hummed like insects. I pressed my back to the cool tile and forced myself to breathe. Caraway had always been a strange man. Tall, pale, smelling faintly of clove cigarettes and embalming powder. He'd been in the trade since he was 16, apprenticed to his own father. And over the years, he'd developed rules. Rules that sounded less like workplace tips and more like superstition. Don't whistle after midnight. Don't leave scissors open on the counter. Don't work alone between 2:33 and 3:03 a.m. I'd always laugh them off. Now, in the thick antiseptic air, I wondered if the rules weren't about old wives' tales but about survival. I retreated from the prep room, locking the door with hands that still trembled. The key scraped like a scream in the lock. I pocketed it and stumbled upstairs toward the staff lounge, needing distance, needing a wall between myself and that body. The mortuary's corridors were longer at night. I passed the viewing room where families came to say goodbye to their loved ones. Its drapes were drawn, its chairs empty. A faint scent of lilies hung there, cloying. In the staff lounge, I made coffee I didn't want and sat in the dark, rocking slightly. My eyes kept sliding to the doorway, half expecting Elena to be standing there, still in her hospital gown, dripping that black fluid onto the carpet. At 3:20 a.m., my phone buzzed again. A text from Caraway. Check the chapel. The door must stay shut. The chapel was a small side room, rarely used except for very small services. I'd left it unlocked earlier to bring in extra folding chairs. My stomach turned over. I made my way back down the hall, each step echoing like a footstep behind me. The chapel door stood ajar, a thin slice of blackness between frame and jamb. I pushed it open. The chapel's single-stained glass window threw colored shadows across the pews. The air smelled of candle wax, though no candles burned. The cross at the altar leaned slightly, as though nudged. Something had been dragged across the carpet. A dark line leading from the altar toward the storage closets. I crouched. The fibers were still damp. Then the organ pipes groaned. Not a melody, just a long, low exhalation of air. I froze. A whisper drifted from the front pew. "Let me out." It was a woman's voice, echoing softly, as though from the belly of the building. I backed out of the chapel, slammed the door, and twisted the lock. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. When I turned, someone was standing at the far end of the corridor, a tall silhouette with a shock of white hair. Relief crashed over me. "Caraway." I called. The figure didn't answer. It turned slowly and walked away, vanishing into the stairwell without a sound. I bolted after it, heart hammering, but when I reached the stairwell it was empty. Only the smell of cloves lingered, and a faint echo of a cough. I descended to the basement again, needing to see if Elena's body was still there. The prep room door was still locked. I pressed my ear to it, nothing. Then, faintly, from the other side, a woman humming, a lullaby. I stumbled back, tripped over the bottom stair, and landed hard on the tile. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Caraway, though the timestamp said 20:59 a.m., nearly half an hour earlier. "If you hear her humming, don't answer." I looked at the message until the words blurred. Upstairs, a door slammed. The building's PA system, unused since before I'd been hired, clicked on. A distorted female voice filled the halls. "You can't keep me here." The line hissed, then went silent. Every light in the mortuary flickered, then steadied to a dim reddish glow. I ran to the office, locked the door, and crouched under the desk. My breath came in sharp gasps. My phone buzzed once more, a new message from an unknown number. "She's awake." My palms were slick, my heart slamming. I tried to steady my breathing, thinking of Caraway's rules. Stay out of the prep room until dawn. Don't answer. Lock the viewing rooms. But outside the office, soft bare footsteps padded along the hall, pausing right at my door. And then, in a voice like a sigh, Elena whispered my name. The door handle trembled once, softly, as though a child were testing it from the other side. I held my breath beneath the desk. My phone screen glowed against my palm, showing nothing but the time 3:37 a.m. My ears strained for the sound again. Nothing. Then a long slow creak slid down the hallway, like someone dragging a finger along the wall. I stayed still until my knees cramped, then forced myself up. The office smelled of dust and printer toner. My reflection in the darkened computer monitor looked hollow-eyed, sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. If I was going to survive until dawn, I needed to understand what was happening. Lock the building down. Stay out of the prep room. Don't answer. Those were Caraway's rules. I unlatched the office door and eased it open an inch. The corridor was empty except for the faint amber emergency lights. Shadows pooled in the corners like oil. I had to check the front doors, I told myself. make sure no one had gotten in. The mortuary's lobby stretched before me, its framed funeral photographs looking down like watchful eyes. The glass doors at the entrance were fogged with condensation. I went to them and rattled the handles. Locked, dead, bolted, as they should be. A flash of lightning outside revealed my own reflection in the glass, and a dark silhouette standing directly behind me. I whirled, heart stuttering. No one. Only the lobby with its chairs, the guest book on its stand, the faint smell of lilies. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and shut my eyes. "Get a grip," I whispered. When I opened them again, words appeared on the fogged glass, written by an unseen finger from the inside et. I stumbled back. The letters slowly melted as condensation dripped down. Thunder rolled overhead. The emergency lights flickered. I turned to run back to the office, and saw Elena standing at the end of the hall, barefoot, hospital gown hanging from her like wet paper. She tilted her head at me, hair plastered to her face. Black fluid ran from the symbols carved into her collarbones, dripping onto the linoleum. I blinked, and she was gone, only an empty hallway. I clutched the stair rail, heart hammering. I had to find a safe room and lock it. I thought of the old embalming supply closet in the basement. Thick wooden door, no windows. As I headed toward the stairwell, the building shifted, not physically, but the corridor seemed longer, the angles subtly wrong. The sound of the storm outside faded as though I were descending into a cavern. The stairwell door opened with a groan. The stairs plunged downward into darkness. The emergency light above flickered twice, then steadied to a deep red glow. I forced myself down step by step. Each time my foot fell, another footfall echoed behind me half a beat later. At the bottom, the prep room door stood ajar. I had locked it. I knew I had. Inside, the gurney was empty. The sheet lay crumpled on the floor like shed skin. The embalming machine hissed softly, its hoses dangling like veins. My breath rasped in my ears. I backed away, turned toward the supply closet down the hall, and almost ran straight into Mr. Carraway. He looked exactly as he had in life, tall, white-haired, wearing his long gray coat, but his face was slack, his eyes dark holes. His jaw opened far too wide, and from it poured a wet black whisper. "You stayed past the window." Then he vanished, the air collapsing inward like a vacuum. I staggered backward until my shoulder hit the cinder block wall. My lungs burned. A low hum began at the edge of hearing, like the whole building was inhaling. The fluorescents buzzed, flickered, and went out, leaving me in a red glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. Down the hall, a figure moved, tall, thin, hair trailing. It walked with a wet shuffle, its bare feet leaving black prints on the tile. It was Elena. Her head lolled, eyes rolled white. With each step, the symbols on her skin glowed faintly. I turned and bolted for the supply closet, slammed the door, and threw the bolt. The room was a narrow rectangle lined with shelves of formaldehyde, bleaching agents, boxes of gloves. It smelled of chemicals and dust. I crouched behind a stack of cardboard boxes. My phone said 3:58 a.m., 2 more hours till dawn. Footsteps padded outside the door. A fingernail dragged down the wood with a sound like a razor on glass. Then, softly, Mortician. She was saying my name. I jammed my fists against my ears. "Don't answer. Don't answer." The doorknob rattled once, twice, then silence. I waited, shaking, until the silence itself became unbearable. When I finally lowered my hands, a new sound seeped through the wall. Not footsteps, not whispers. Breathing, but huge, cavernous, like lungs the size of the building. Each inhalation pulled the air pressure tighter. Bottles creaked on the shelves. Dust rose in tiny whirlwinds. My phone buzzed. A new text from Carraway's number. "If the building breathes, don't breathe with it." I clamped my hands over my mouth, fighting the urge to gasp. The pressure grew until my vision sparkled. Then, just as suddenly, it released. The bottles settled. The dust fell. I drew in a silent, shaking breath. My phone read 4 M somewhere beyond the door. The embalming machine switched on by itself. Then came a loud metallic slam. The front doors of the mortuary sealing shut as though welded. I realized with a slow creeping horror that I was no longer just working the night shift. I was locked inside with something that was learning to walk. The supply closet smelled of chemicals and cold sweat. My own breath fogged in the dimness. Every muscle in my body trembled from the effort of keeping silent. I clutched my phone, but its glow felt like a beacon in the dark, so I shut it off and sat blind, counting heartbeats. Minutes stretched. Somewhere beyond the door, a sound like dragging feet moved down the hallway toward the prep room. Then nothing. Then the faint hiss of the embalming machine again. I'd been sitting on my haunches so long my knees locked. Slowly I rose, careful not to knock over the bottles. The room felt like a tomb. I had two choices: stay hidden until dawn or move. But Caraway's last message gnawed at me. If the building breathes, don't breathe with it. I didn't even know what that meant. At 4:33 a.m., my phone vibrated once, no tone. A new message. You can't hide forever. No sender. The text bubbles pulsed once. Then the message vanished. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, a thin line of black liquid was seeping under the closet door, spreading across the floor toward my shoes. It smelled of earth and rot. I backed up until my spine hit the shelves. My hand closed around a heavy embalming fluid bottle. The knob turned once, then stilled. A voice. Mortician. I held my breath. The knob turned again, then stopped. Footsteps retreated. I exhaled slowly, silence. Then the PA system crackled to life somewhere above, and Elena's voice filled the entire mortuary, a sing-song whisper that echoed off every wall. Come and see what you've made me. The line hissed, clicked off. I realized if she was in the PA room, she wasn't at my door. This might be my only chance to move. I eased the bolt back, cracked the door, and peeked out. The hallway was empty. Emergency lights cast the floor in a weak amber glow. The black liquid had vanished. I slipped out, closing the door softly behind me. My shoes made no sound on the tile. I headed for the basement stairs, thinking if I could reach the back exit or the boiler room, maybe I could break a window and get out. As I passed the prep room, I glanced through the tiny wired glass window in the door. The gurney was still there, and so was Elena. She sat upright now, back perfectly straight, her legs dangling off the side like a doll's. Her hair hung in wet strands. Her eyes were open, reflecting the emergency light. The embalming machine's hoses snaked into her neck and arm, but she didn't seem to notice. Black fluid pulsed through them in a steady rhythm. Her head turned toward me. Very slowly, I stumbled back. Her lips curved in a small smile. Then she raised her right hand and beckoned. I bolted down the hall, heart slamming. Doors rattled as I passed them. The viewing room drapes fluttered, though no windows were open. The smell of lilies rose everywhere, thick enough to choke. I rounded a corner and slammed into the wall, and the building shifted again. The hallway beyond no longer led to the boiler room, but to the chapel. Its stained glass window glowed faintly from some unseen moonlight. On the altar lay a black book bound in cracked leather. Drawn as if by a hook, I stepped inside. The air was cold, my breath clouding. The book's cover bore the same symbols carved into Elena's skin. I opened it. Pages of tight script, some in English, most in a language of curling lines and dots. In the margin, Caraway's handwriting. Do not finish the ritual. Containment only. I flipped to a page marked with a scrap of funeral veil. A diagram showed a human body with tubes snaking from neck and arms, surrounded by a circle of sigils. Beneath it, scrawled in Caraway's hand, price to vessel. Do not embalm fully. My stomach dropped. He had known about her. He'd brought her here. Footsteps echoed behind me. I slammed the book shut, spun, and saw Elena standing in the doorway, black fluid running down her arms like gloves. Mortician, she whispered. Finish what you started. I backed up toward the altar. She moved with a jerky marionette's grace, each step accompanied by a wet, slapping sound. Her hospital gown dragged behind her, leaving black streaks on the carpet. She stopped at the front pew, cocked her head. "You took me apart. Put me back." Her voice was layered now, hers and another deeper one beneath it. The stained glass window behind the altar pulsed like a heart. Shadows crawled across the pews. Reaching toward me, I clutched the book to my chest and bolted through the side door of the chapel into a hallway I didn't recognize. The mortuary's geometry had twisted completely. The floor slanted. The ceiling dripped condensation. Portraits of the deceased lined the walls, their eyes following me. I ran until my lungs burned, clutching the book, and burst into the viewing room. Rows of chairs faced a closed casket at the front. Candles flickered though no flame burned. Behind the casket, Elena waited. She smiled, eyes black now, and whispered, "This is your work." The casket lid creaked open. Inside lay not a body but a mirror. And in the mirror I saw myself, pale eyes black, tubes snaking from my neck. I stumbled back, dropped the book. The mirror rippled like water. From it a hand reached out, my own hand, but gray and cold, and seized my wrist. I screamed and tore free, bolting for the door. As I fled down yet another shifting hallway, her voice followed, soft and almost tender. "You can't leave. We're not finished." My watch said 4:59 a.m. Dawn was still more than an hour away. And for the first time I realized I might not live to see it. The hallway narrowed until the ceiling almost grazed my head. The book thumped against my ribs as I ran, its cracked leather warm like living skin. Every door I passed bore a nameplate of someone I'd embalmed. Their names whispered as I passed, voices like exhaled breath. I stumbled into the prep room. The embalming table stood empty. The hoses lay in coils like dead snakes. The drain at the center of the floor pulsed, black liquid welling up and retreating like a heartbeat. I turned to leave, and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the room. It wasn't Elena. It was taller, its head almost brushing the light fixtures, limbs too long, shoulders sloping into claws. Its face was a blur, as though smeared with ash. Yet I could see its eyes, two pits of cold red light. It tilted its head, and the sound it made was like a slow inhalation. Behind it, the stainless steel reflected something different, a funeral chapel instead of the prep room. My reflection was gone entirely. It stepped closer. The room went colder than the freezer vaults. My breath came in frantic clouds. "Mortician," it said, but the voice came from inside my skull. "You opened the gate. You made the vessel." I stumbled back until my heel struck the drain. My hand found a scalpel on the tray. Useless against this thing, but I held it anyway. It reached out one long hand, claws clicking against the tile. As it moved, reality stuttered, the prep room flickering into the chapel, then into a field of black water under a starless sky. "Finish what you began," it hissed, "or join her." Elena appeared at its side, jerky as a marionette. Her hospital gown clung to her like a funeral shroud. Black fluid dripped from her mouth. Her eyes were empty sockets now, but something behind them watched me. She whispered, "The book tells you how." I turned and fled. The hallway beyond twisted into a staircase spiraling downward. I took the steps two at a time, stumbling, scraping my knuckles on the walls. I emerged into the storage level, rows of sealed caskets, their lids rattling softly as if something inside wanted out. The air smelled of formaldehyde and damp earth. I ducked behind a row of coffins and crouched, clutching the book. My fingers left sweat stains on the cover. My mind raced Caraway's warnings, the window hour, the symbols on Elena's skin. Then I heard Caraway's voice from the darkness. "Containment only. Don't finish the ritual." I swung my flashlight. Nothing but a casket propped against the wall. A whisper, "Containment only." Then a knock from inside the casket. Once, twice, 3 times. The lid creaked open a fraction. A gray hand reached out, nails long and cracked. I ran again. Through another door. into the embalming supply room. Shelves of chemicals towered above me, their labels flickering between English and something older. The black book pulsed with heat. I slammed it onto the counter, flipping pages. The diagram of Elena's body stared back. Beside it, scrawled in Caraway's hand, severe connection at the heart. A second note. Circle of salt. Must be unbroken. I scanned the shelves, found a container of Mortuary grade salt, and grabbed it. My hands shook so badly I spilled half on the floor. Footsteps in the hallway, many feet now, like a funeral procession. I poured a rough circle of salt around myself and the book, whispering prayers I hadn't spoken since childhood. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Elena's voice. Mortician, come out. Another voice layered beneath hers. Open. The knob turned but didn't move past the salt line at the threshold. Something hissed in frustration. Then the lights flickered and died. In the pitch dark, the book opened on its own, pages fluttering until they stopped. A sigil glowed faintly, lines of fire. In my head, a word: speak it. If I spoke it, I might complete the ritual. Caraway had written don't finish. But if I didn't, the thing outside might break through. The knob rattled again, harder. The door bowed inward as if from a great weight. A whisper from the book. Say it, and bind her. Another whisper, Elena's now, from the hallway. Say it, and free us. I clamped my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth. Salt crunched under my knees. My breath came in ragged gasps. Then, from nowhere, Caraway's voice again. Soft but firm. Remember the heart. I opened my eyes. In the dim glow of the book, I saw the embalming trocar. A long, sharp instrument, lying beside me. Its steel gleamed faintly. I knew what I had to do. I closed the book, scooped it up, and blew the salt line open at the door. The darkness beyond hissed with delight. I stepped out into the hallway. A trocar clutched like a spear. Elena and the tall presence waited at the far end, their outlines flickering in and out of existence. I started toward them. The morning after, the police found me sitting in the chapel, drenched in embalming fluid and salt, holding the trocar like a priest holds a crucifix. The mortuary was in ruins. Walls cracked, lights blown out, stainless steel tables overturned. Elena Price's body was gone. Not burned, not stolen, gone. No trace of her remained except black streaks along the tile, like veins in marble. They said I must have hallucinated. They said the storm, the night shift, the chemicals, and exhaustion had broken me. They said bodies don't walk, and shadows don't breathe. But I know what I saw. I remember Elena's black eyes staring into mine as I drove the trocar through her chest, straight into the heart, and the explosion of sound that wasn't a scream, but 1,000 whispers exhaling at once. I remember the presence unfurling behind her, rising like a column of smoke, then collapsing into itself with a sigh of relief. I remember the chapel folding like paper around us, the coffins screaming as their lids slammed shut, and then silence. When dawn came, everything was back where it should be. The mortuary looked normal again, except for the scorch marks on the floor forming a circle the size of the chapel. Caraway never returned. The police couldn't reach him. His house stood empty, his phone disconnected. I quit the mortuary the next day. I packed up my life, left the town, changed my number. But it didn't matter. The thing I'd bound, or freed, came with me. At night, I dream of her standing at the foot of my bed, hospital gown dripping black fluid, whispering, "Finish what you started." My bathroom mirror fogs up with words I didn't write. My phone vibrates at 2:33 a.m. with texts from no one. Sometimes I wake to find salt poured in a circle around my bed, though I live alone. I've moved 6 times in the last 2 years. She always finds me. And so I write this now under the title it deserves. My most terrifying night as a mortician. This one still haunts me. I write because it's the only way to keep my hands from shaking. I write because maybe someone else will read this and not make the same mistakes. But mostly, I write because she's here again, in the corner of the room, watching as my fingers move across the keys. She smiles, and I know before the night is over she'll lean close to my ear and whisper, "Finish what you started."
Subscribe for more videos.